Oh my word, what a privilege. I don't even know where to start because when I read a bit about Tumi and I was in awe of the young woman who's doing so much. But I think I missed some element, especially the presidency part. You have a program. There's a lot that I'm going to just throw in apart from what I prepared. But I think for me, it is an honor to meet a woman, a young woman. I call you young because you're younger than me. Such stature and caliber. Ladies, we are in good hands, and there's a lot that we're going to learn today. Jumping straight to it. Do me tell, I know that Ulindi introduced APRM a bit. Tell us how you got into that work. And for me, it is the African angle of it, because as women on boards, it's very rare. We've got amazing women that we've spoken to, but women who work in the continent. You know, I know that personally, because of the work I do, I want to one day be able to go there. Talk to us about the work that you do, APRM, please.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I would just like to say thank you for inviting me, and I'm really honored to spend this morning with you, and you all look absolutely lovely. So thank you to Women on Boards for having me here. So how did I get into APRM, to the African Union? It's actually one of those things that it could be either luck or God's work. You know, it's actually so. It's like starting at the end of the story. So I'm just trying to think where do I start? So I had, as you saw, I used to be a lawyer. I was a corporate lawyer at Goldman's, and I moved on and on. I mean, I've changed roles and transitioned quite a number of times in my professional career. At some point, I decided that I wanted to go to Harvard University. And for two reasons. Firstly, because it had been my dream, quite honestly. And secondly, because I got to a point in my career where I felt like I wanted to shift to the public sector. I'd always been in the private sector space. And I needed to transition. I felt like I needed a lot more information, skills, and more development.
Yeah.
So anyways, to jump quickly to your question, I graduated from Harvard with a master's degree, and literally I'm working on side more and I bumped into an old friend that I had worked with before I left for Harvard. I mean, a few years before I had worked for the 2010 World Cup. He was like, "What are you doing now?" So I'm like, "Oh, I just got back from Harvard. I don't know. I need to figure it out, quite honestly." He says, "You know what? I've just been appointed as CEO for an agency of the African Union. You used to be a corporate lawyer. Please come help me with corporate governance." We don't have, it's the one pillar of the organization we're just not making any inroads in. And I thought, really? Of course. But so that's how I got in. Didn't apply. I didn't think actively about doing it. I had other ideas. I had had other ideas, but I decided, well, I mean, why not? So that's how I got into it. But, so I got into this organization, African. Thought, oh, this is so big. I've never been in an intergovernmental organization, international organization. And so I had to really learn that. It was like being thrown to the deep end. So I said to myself, I don't shy away from risk. I don't shy away from learning. I'm a lifelong learner. So I said, okay, I need to learn here. Value can I bring into this organization, and specifically the work that I'm called to do?
Lovely. Wow. Thank you. And I think I want a round of applause exactly for that. You didn't go, I'm still going to think. So it was more when you said maybe God wanted you there. It wasn't really for you to be at the right place at the right time.
Absolutely.
We are challenged in South Africa about the issues of corruption, the lands out there, things are floating. Just talk to us about the APRM issues governance, because somehow think among the people, somebody said they were doing sort of a thesis on African leadership and governance, which is something that I think I'm sitting on the sidelines and judging is lacking in terms of our governing mechanisms in Africa. Talk to us about what you have seen as the impact of your work at APRM with regard specifically to African governance, both around the areas of Ghana where you work at, as well as here at home. What is it that we need to do better in terms of governing from your perspective?
Okay, so that's quite an interesting question, because the work that I was then called to do at APRM, so basically what APRM does is we assess countries, African countries, for performance with regards to governance, and we look at governance very broadly: political, constitutional governance, economic governance, and corporate governance, which is what I specialize in. And we consistently felt that at the time we were consistently giving very similar reports around corporate governance is still running in this country, to improve and make sure that, we power up the private sector, we fortify and bring in skilled leadership to drive these entities, because at the end of the day, it's about improving the economy. So at some point, very soon after getting into APRM, I then said to myself, we consistently giving the same feedback and recommendations to countries. Actually, what we need to be doing is to put together a framework for countries in terms of this is what good leadership requires within a corporate perspective. So corporate governance. So in South Africa, we obviously have the King Code, but on the African continent, there is no universal African code. There hadn't been at the time. So I said to the gentleman, Dr. Maloga, what do you think? Do you think we should have like framework on the African continent? And he was like, go for it. And so, your question is interesting for me, because when I looked, what should that African framework look like? What are the issues that we have? We have to, first of all, diagnose what issues do we have? Corruption, no transparency, no disclosure mechanisms, and as a result, a lot of SMEs in the informal sector. So the diagnosis for us meant, okay, now you do have the results, therefore what do you put in place? So I do think that, we have the OECD corporate governance codes, the G20 and so on. But when it came to saying, let's put together an African perspective, it was a very difficult issue. You would think, well, we're in Africa, it makes sense, so it must be values driven, it must have an African perspective. But I think, it could be because of my own personal issues, and I hope he'll speak about that. When you are a leader, a Black woman leader in positions of authority, and you have to come up with ideas, new ideas, so to say, the sense of, is this my place, really? Who am I, type of thing. So in any event, putting together this framework for me really meant this is what I believe leadership should look like on the African continent. And what I think it should look like is corporates must be entities that do not only work towards maximizing profits for their shareholders, but there is an equally very important responsibilities for corporates to actually play a developmental role and contribute to socio-economic issues in the country. And I think the one is not primarily more important than the other. And that is what corporate governance has not actually measured in the past. Often corporate governance looks at how much profits can we maximize for the shareholder. And granted, in the recent past, we've seen a move away from that towards saying a stakeholder model of corporate governance, which is, any company has several stakeholders. So let's make sure that we address the needs and the challenges of all our stakeholders, including employees, suppliers, and so on. But what the African principles on corporate governance have done is to move even a step further, to say corporate governance must actually, their foundation must be values and mission and shared purpose. So that we have not seen before. And so when I had to sit back and say to myself, this is what I truly believe leadership should be about. First and foremost, it must be about shared purpose. Secondly, it must be values-based and mission-driven. And so we had not seen that kind of corporate governance frameworks in place. And I said to myself, and I prayed a lot, luckily I pray a lot. And I prayed a lot. I said, God, please guide me, because there is no ways you can put me in this place to do this work at this particular time and not be able to bring what I truly believe to be the truth about how leadership should work. And so I cannot simply just duplicate what we have seen in the past. I have to bring this element into corporate governance. So so that's what I think we were actually able to do, to sort of try and now redefine and reshift how we have viewed corporate governance. Because I know you want to ask the next question, but I think this is very important, because if you think about it, any company, if you are a director of a company is created by us, by humans. Someone went and drafted a legislation called the Companies Act. They decided you have to incorporate it. So it's created by human beings. And so it can't be that our own creation, we created this company in order to extract value from us and bring nothing back to humanity. So it was really a way of rewriting the rules of a company and what it's intended to do, that yes, it must bring about profits, but essentially it must also work to address the very community where it makes its own profits. It must give back. So that has not been legalized or legislated before, but I felt it needed to be.
Sure. Ladies, I tell you, powerhouse of note. We are women, after all, and the few gentlemen, and we are aspiring directors or directors in the room. You brought an important element about having to think outside the box about how would a governance perspective for Africa look like. I'm going to add a twist to it, because we know the challenges that we meet, whether in government or corporate, even in households as females. Our challenges are totally different to what other sort of in Africa countries look at from a female perspective. Even though we know that there's other countries that are not as liberated, Africa has the biggest challenges in terms of women liberation. Now, talk to me about, you're holding a senior position, you go to African countries where sometimes women leaders are, you've got to choose, are you a woman who's going to bow down to a man, or you're going to still assert your role because this is who you are, what you do? How has that challenge, how have you navigated the element of being a woman in such a space where primarily women in Africa, we are supposed to bow down to men, not supposed to, we were basically essentially grown up or groomed to say indoda must, mama must. How have you navigated that? Because it is important for us to take that away.
Yeah, I've been very lucky in my career, in the sense that I had to deal with those issues quite early on in my career. So by the time I got to doing work on the continent, I had actually learned, and I have tried several ways and strategies to make my voice heard. And it was a learning curve for me. So, when I became a partner at Bowman's, I was the only Black woman partner.
There we go.
I was quite young. I was 33 years old.
Sure.
And there was no other female or Black female on the board. And that brought on a lot of issues for me, learning. And primarily it was, Tumi, you need to speak up. Your voice must be heard. And I think because of what you've said, societal norms, we are raised to be women, and women listen, are spoken to, and they don't speak out. And so, and I went to a Catholic school, I was raised by very strict parents. And, I knew my place in society, and a grandmother who was very like, sit like a lady, speak like a lady. And so, getting to that position at Bowman's, I really had to grow up in the sense that I had to say to myself, why am I being put in this position, and why am I the first woman? And how do I then learn? Because I had to relearn. I had to relearn how to be expressive and how to be authentic and speak what I truly believe. And if I saw an injustice, or if I thought there needs to be a change, I had to be able to communicate that. So I was quite young. And so by the time I got to the African Union, I would say, I was quite hardened, I was like, if it must happen, it must happen.
Absolutely.
I die, I die.
If I die,
But
if I
will,
perish, I perish. I love that.
but I will tell you, you will know exactly what I think at exactly the same time that I think it. But it's a work, it doesn't just happen automatically, and you have to be committed as a woman. And it's scary when you're not used to it. And I wasn't used to it. It was quite a scary process. I had to get an executive coach, and I grew up with a father who, even though was very strict, was the kind of person who would say to me, when you speak to a person, look them straight in the eye. Growing up in KZN, women, we're taught to look down. We don't look up. And yet my father would be like, anybody you speak to, whatever room you get into, walk tall. We're very tall in my family. And he'd be say, you are very tall, we're tall for a reason. Shoulders up.
Oh, yes.
Person straight. So, so that helped a lot. But also it was not enough, because societal norms are that strong. They permeate every aspect of our lives. And so there's a lot of undoing that needs to take place.
Lovely. I hope our listeners online are hearing this, because one of the challenges when I go out, I'm a very outspoken person. You meet me, I will tell you what I think, exactly like you, when I think it. And we were taught to tone it down because we sound too aggressive. And there is a line between assertiveness and aggressiveness, but sometimes we, as women, we tend to like tone it down because I don't want people to say I am rude, I am that. But I love the takeaway. Tumi said, consciously work on your assertiveness. Tell yourself, I want to, when I leave this morning, I'm going to Women on Boards. I'm alone because I know that sometimes it's a challenge for women walking into spaces. I am going to walk up to another female, assert myself, introduce myself, and that's what you had to do. I love that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be where you are, and we are learning. Let's talk about governance, stability, and development in the African context. So, what have you seen as, because you touched on a bit of being human in companies, to say companies were started by humans, but we tend to forget the human element of giving back. Now, what have you seen as tangible socio-economic outcomes when companies are managed properly? What have you seen as the impact to, as you said, to the other humans, to communities when companies are governed properly?
Yeah, so it depends how you define by governing properly. You could have a company that has only men on the board, and it's governed properly in the sense that it fits within all these, the King Code of governance. It ticks all the boxes. But for me, governing properly must mean inclusion.
Yes.
So is it a board that has women on it?
Yeah.
Because women do bring that particular element of inclusion, so because we are also mothers and aunts and sisters, when you place women on the board, you will find, and this has been proven through research, that sustainability metrics in the company improve significantly. because you're not just thinking narrowly about the financial performance of the company. You're also thinking about how are we treating our employees, how are we treating our stakeholders, and also who and what is the company within the community within which it serves. So for me, a company that is governed well must be a company that takes into account the fact that we are a diverse nation or globally, and therefore we must include women, we must include people living with disabilities. Yeah. We must also take into account the issues that surround us. So we are all human, and in this day and age, this volatility that you see globally, and this is another issue. So governing properly, and yet you're looking only at the organizational issues. And yes, that fits. You tick all the boxes. You fulfill all the metrics. But geopolitics is becoming more and more important. So as a company, I believe that the boards, one of the three top issues that boards really need to encounter and deal with currently is the geopolitics. What is happening in the world around us, and how does it affect the company and therefore the national issues? The second issue that I believe affects all of us is the increasing use of AI and technology.
Yes.
And so therefore, a board, unless on the agenda it has issues related to AI governance, then that board has not really started to deal with its own resilience. How will AI affect it? How will AI affect its own employees? So AI governance, obviously, cybersecurity is very important. But primarily is the third one is exactly where I started, which is around the shared purpose. I believe it's one of the top three issues. What is the mission of the company and of the leaders in that company in terms of that company's space within society, within the country in which it operates?
Lovely. Just to remind you, ladies, we will have a Q&A at the end, also online. Please put down your questions because I have a lot of questions, but obviously I'm going to have to share with you a bit. So we talk about sharing experiences and strengthening governance through the mechanism that APRM does, because
Yes.
the central part of what you do is peer learning.
Yes.
Countries sharing experiences, identifying weaknesses, and reinforcing those practices. What has been the most surprising lessons coming out of this peer reviewing experience? Because you do is it called self-assessment?
Self-assessment,
yes.
That's
what
correct.
has been the most sort of surprising when people say we've assessed, this is what we found about ourselves? And what have other countries, when you travel, learned from those results? Zabang.
So you're right. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the APRM process, so I said we assess countries for their performance with regards to their governance practices. But before we start the assessment, countries must self-assess. They must say themselves, are we performing well within democratic governance, corporate governance, and so on? And it's very interesting when the reports of the self-assessment reports come back and you're reading like, no, I don't. I mean, there are countries like, for instance,
You're like, why did you lie on them?
on this one, So I think what countries tend to do when they put mirrors in front of themselves is a very difficult process for them, and it's very hard sometimes to come face to face with yourself. So the manner in which the self-assessment is done is we get civil society to drive it. Because if government drives it, they will tell you what they think they're doing, but the people who actually know what a government's doing are people on the ground.
Oh, yes.
And not government officials themselves. So what often comes out in those is, I would say, very exaggerated views about how they're performing. And broadly in governance terms, in the constitutional part, I think most countries on the continent, some countries, certainly constitutionalism is an issue. I think we have all seen a lot of coups, but some of them are not violent. So they happen through constitutional changes. And so you have governments that stay on forever in power without actually seeing any blood being spilled. But that doesn't mean that because there's no fight, therefore, the government's legitimate. You also see, within the private sector perspective, again, there is very limited women representation across the continent. And South Africa currently stands at around 38% of women representation on JSE boards. That is, if you believe the Boardroom Africa reports, but the University of Stellenbosch issued its own report last year, and it's putting it at 19%.
Sure.
Which is very poor.
Very.
So, between the two, you don't really know, 38 and 19. So the truth is, and the factual aspect of it is probably somewhere in between. Okay, and then you have, so I think the best performing countries currently, South Africa, even with the 38 or 19, and then Kenya. Botswana has always done well with regards to women representation in the private sector, both at the board level and executive level. But you must remember that we often focus, and that's not wrong, but we often focus on women on boards like this organization. But if you think about it, for a woman to get onto a board, they must have occupied executive roles, right? Now, if you're not working hard to ensure that you have women at executive level, that then limits how much you can get or how many women you can get onto the boards. So I think the work, yes, it's important to ensure that we get as many women on the boards as possible, but the primary work also sits at executive level.
Sure.
And we have to make sure that our HR professionals actively go out to recruit women to serve at executive levels, and those that are inside are promoted already, because that's how then you make sure that you have women sitting at boards. Notwithstanding, I'm not in any way minimizing all the other issues which is just as critical, which are challenging, such as, the fact that boards, you have to know people, it's not necessarily based on merit, it's based on relationships. And sometimes, sometimes I even look at the Sunday Times, like, this person was appointed to the board. How did they get there? Like, you don't know how people get onto the boards, there's no transparency around it. It's very much based on relationships, and that's problematic.
It is.
Because if there's no transparency about appointment to boards, then how do you know to apply?
Yeah.
So how do you give a woman who's worked hard to not only develop their skills, develop themselves, they don't stand a chance. So there are all these other major issues, challenges that we have to address around women on boards. And then women get onto boards, right? And then they don't get allocated what we call high impact roles in terms of the committee work. So not that the social and ethics committees are not important, they're critical, but there are audit and risk committees, finance related roles within the board. So those high impact roles within the board, you find that women who are already sitting on boards do not have access to them. And you don't quite know how are these decisions being taken, maybe on the golf course or wherever else. So the whole ecosystem around how you get on the board, and once you're on the board, how you maneuver it. And this is why I truly think organizations such as these ones are critical, because then you begin to demystify all of this work. And once you've demystified it, the other important element is you've got to align with, you've got to get policies to work in favor of what you are talking about. Because it's one thing to have you guys discuss and pick out these are challenges, but how do you then address them? You can't address them per company or per board. So you need policy reforms, and this is the space where I sit and where I said to myself, as a woman, I have to ensure that I understand what is going on out there. So the policy reforms I speak to must address this. So for instance, I'm very proud that the African Principles on Corporate Governance, it's the first framework that has said there has to be a 50-50 board representation on any listed company on the continent. So we need those kinds of policy reforms. And so you guys, one of the issues that I think is important to emerge out of this organization is your advocacy work, advocating with the relevant policymakers, advocating. Obviously, media is an important part of it, but essentially you have to get to those people who make the rules.
Thank you. And you touched on an aspect that was part of my question. Who's managing our time? How many minutes do I have? Well, I don't have nothing. It's finished. Aye. Okay, give me 5 more minutes then. Then we'll open to questions, or 3 more. Is that okay? Perfect. The 10 more minutes, including questions, because I've got 2 last ones, including questions. Okay. All right. Perfect. That's why I can cover the 2 questions and then open it up.
Let the spirit move us.
Let the spirit move us. We've been led by the spirit but you've touched on an important element of policy influence. Ladies, Tumi cannot stress this enough. I cannot stress this enough. Raise your hand up. Sometimes it's not paid because you don't get money in the pocket, but look at it as the difference and the impact that you're going to make to sit on. If there is another opportunity like the G20 to say, I'm raising my hand to sit on a task force that is going to talk about such policies where I'm going to influence for the next generation of women. I might not see it now, but do that. Raise your hand. And part of what do we touch on an important element, and we laughed about golf, networking. Yeah. How do you expect people to find you if you don't go out and network? One of the things that I boldly do when I go with people to events, I'm like, you're going to sit in a table, we will meet, go speak to other people, because that is what networking is about. So my 2 sort of last questions in terms of your personal and professional leadership reflections. So you've done a lot of work in terms of technical advisory measure with a major institution. What has sort of shaped your own philosophy on ethical and transformational leadership as you see different companies, countries do things? How has that influenced how you then interact with Bantu Bet? What is your NPL? Sorry, Nabantu. Because that is obviously going to be shown by the work that you do outside the work field. How has that shaped how you look at transformative leadership?
Well, I think women, particularly when you are brown-skinned, the work that we do is very transformational, whether you incorporated yourself or not. I think the work that I have done in the past, and I'll be very honest, like I've had to grow, particularly for me. I think when I got appointed a partner at Bowman's, that was truly a growth opportunity for me. At the time, I had not really thought much about transformational leadership, and yet I was then thrust onto this leadership role, essentially, because when you're a lawyer, or most professions, actually, there's a lot of technical work, and we focus on the technical aspect of our work. And I was a very good, brilliant lawyer. But then I have to get onto a leadership role, and that's a completely different thing.
Absolutely.
So how do you lead? And I hadn't really thought much about it, and so it has evolved over a period of time. I mean, like I said, I even went back to school on the one hand, and I had to also take some courses online, and I found myself a mentor, because I realized that I can't do what I do not know, And so that was, for me, one of the turning points, really, when I found myself a mentor who said to me, okay, you've got to think about who you are. I think it was, the lady from Common Purpose, when she was speaking about leadership, and she's saying, it really is about you.
Yep.
You know, leadership is about your values and your own goals and how you show up in the world and how you believe that what is it that you believe you are called to do. And when you do identify what you're called to do, then you start to evolve towards being the person that, because what we're called to do is beyond us.
Yeah.
It's beyond our organizations. It's about impacting lives.
Yes.
So whether the lives we are called to impact are within the organization, whether the lives we're called to impact are your husband and children,
Yeah.
if you are a stay-at-home mom or even a professional woman, or lives elsewhere. So for me, I got to a point where I said, and this is why I left legal practice, because technically I was really great at what I was doing, but I got to a point where I said, I cannot find a connection between what I do on a daily basis as a corporate lawyer and how it impacts a person on the ground.
Sure.
And that was after doing a lot of work. And I mean, if you had asked me that question today, I would answer it differently because, I've grown, and actually I know that if I work on a big transaction, you create jobs and people have food and so on. But at the time, I really couldn't see how being a corporate lawyer made an impact for people on the ground. And so I then took a decision that I needed to leave law.
Wow.
And I needed to go do something that I felt when I woke up in the morning, I know that I'm helping.
Sure.
One way or the other. And that's the
Wow.
decision I took for myself.
The last question. What was the need for you to start Itina Bantu so that we can open to the
Yes.
panel? What did you identify as a need and to say, I need to start this foundation?
So, education has truly been a game changer in my life.
Okay.
And the kind of opportunities that I've had from an educational perspective. When I left high school, I went to UCT and I got a scholarship from British Council.
Sure.
I left UCT with 2 degrees, went to practice law. Like I said, at some point I stopped working mid-career. I went to Harvard University. And that also was truly a transformational period of my life. I spent the most 12 amazing months of my life at Harvard. And I came back home. So before even that, I had been going back to my primary school. I was raised in Edendale, Pietermaritzburg. So I would always go back to my old school, like, hi, how are you? I'd be helping, the kids who don't have uniform or the school needs a projector. So very ad hoc,
Okay.
And then at some point I said to myself, actually, I can do more by working with other people. And that's when I decided then that actually I need to incorporate an entity to do this work that has been so ad hoc.
Yeah.
And it was really around having recognized that for myself, education has played such a key role. And so I also wanted to give opportunities to some other children who come from the type of communities that I came from. And so I went back to my old primary school, the same one that I'd been working with. And I said to the principal, who luckily had been my teacher when I was like in standard 4, he was still the principal just before he left. And I said, this is what I now want to do. I know we've been working together for a couple of years, and now I'd like to incorporate. And he said, please, and he brought other principals in the area. And so now we really have a foundation that has managed to take some of the highest performing girls from those communities, and it's rural communities, and we've placed them in some leading boarding schools like Inanda Seminary. We also have because of the network and wanting to work with other people, we've also hosted career expos for many more other schools, and we're helping. What we found, with this work is that a lot of kids, even however intelligent they are, they don't have the necessary support at home of parents. Not that parents are not involved, they are involved, but parents can't guide them around careers, around applying to universities, things that we take for granted. So we have a program. We work with GradesMatch. We identify the top performing schools and, children out of the 12 high schools that we work with, and we take them through grade 11 and 12, career guidance, and GradesMatch offers what we call deposits for university application. So that entire university application can be very daunting for parents, and universities say it's actually a barrier for some kids because they don't have the necessary support. So, I mean, it's work that's still growing, but it's also work that has given me a lot of insight into some of the social issues that we have in the country. When we started off, in terms of the Thina Bantu Foundation being incorporated, I thought we would have a bursary scheme. But what I have found is it's more than that. When you have a child and you go to her home, so before the year starts, we buy the provisions, the trunks and so on, and we deliver it at home. And you get into the house and, I also had another mentor who was supposed to be here for that work, and she said to me, Tumi, ungasabi, ask the mother or the grandmother to show you the clothes that the child will take to boarding school. And I did that on my first visit. I mean, as scared as I was. And, Gogo led me to, a makeshift bedroom and says, okay, these are the clothes. And without, her name is Busisi, without Busisi was saying to me, you will actually need to buy clothes. I knew that this little girl cannot go to that type of school with those kinds of clothes. She had eczema and so on, and the mom's using Vaseline. So what I'm saying is, it started off or at least I had characterized it as a bursary program, but essentially it's a lot more than that. You realize that actually our social issues, a child cannot perform at school unless they have the necessary support, the basics. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, questions? Oh, there's already had, wow, that was the first one. Avadali, you're going to help me. There's 2, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So she's starting there. I don't know, do we have a roving mic? Please help me also identify. Thank you. And also online, Avadala, you're going to be able to read the online questions for us. Thank you. Oh, right at that. Yes, I saw, before I even said, do we have questions?
And thank you so much for that. My name is Mashutu. And my question is something you mentioned very earlier on. You said that you had to develop strategies to be heard. Can you please unpack what that was?
Can we take 2 and then sort of, I think there's 6 people, 2 each, and then you can answer.
Okay.
Oh, so. Okay.
Morning, everyone. Tumi, my name is Zinhle Sithole. Question is, I'm interested in understanding the framework. You make reference to a framework on the phenomenal work that you were doing. I'm interested in understanding how well do we do as a continent, but with special reference to South Africa in terms of governance. How does best look like as it refers to more advanced markets? And are we closer, a bit further away in terms of best practice as it relates to corporate governance? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the first question, Mashudu, around strategies for learning how to speak. Again, I'm sorry, I have to ask, sorry, what was your name again? Yes, common, Amalia. So, when Amalia was speaking and she was talking about the work that Common Purpose does, and she says the starting point is always you as a person. We are guided personally by so many influences in our lives, whether it's family, the community where we grew up in. So you have to unlearn so many things about yourself. Like, why do you hold your tongue when you can actually be speaking? And I was doing that a lot before. I was second guessing myself, deciding not to speak. And what I had to do is, unfortunately, you can't define it in one sentence. And you almost need tools and help to do it. Because, how do you know that something is a shortcoming if you don't know it's a shortcoming? For instance, I'll give you an example. I was raised by my grandmother, and I'm very proud about what she taught me about being a lady and speaking well, and please and thank yous. But that actually also had its own shortcomings, and I didn't know, that the fact that I was raised to be a young lady meant that there are certain things that cannot come out of my mouth. And I'm not talking about insults. Don't cause fights, don't necessarily contradict people. It's not worth it. And yet you are in a leadership role. You absolutely have to. You absolutely have to disagree and tell them, I believe that it needs to happen in this manner or that manner. So to answer your question, the strategy is really, I can refer you to some of the books that I read, which I found very useful. One of those was written by a man called Professor Heifetz, who actually ended up digressing. I read this book.
I'm not the one who's between your teeth,
No.
but I'm loving it.
So Professor Heifetz, I was having this bad issue at work. I was working for Master Builder South Africa, and I was called in to say, okay, you first CEO woman, black, and so on. And I realized actually these people don't want transformation. They want it on paper, but now I'm here, I'm saying this is what we need to do. And I'm about to leave. And I'm like, I'm leaving this organization. And I call a good friend of mine. I'm like, this is what's happening. What do you think? He says, no. That's not what you don't leave when things get hard. You reinvent yourself. You learn how to deal with difficult issues. So she refers me to a book which is written by Ronald Heifetz, who it happens was a professor at Harvard. And for me, it was mind-blowing. I was like, people actually go to school to learn how to deal with the problems I'm facing. Leadership is actually a whole subject. And I wrote to this guy after reading his book. I was like, dear Professor Ronald Heifetz, my name's Tumi. I live in South Africa. I just read your book. I love it, that this is what I've learned. And I would love to meet you one day.
So it's basically about making sure that you reinvent, you join common purpose. And get yourself ready, right? Get yourself ready to the next level.
Yes.
You can answer the next question. Thanks to me. I'm just mindful of our time.
Or the African framework.
Yes.
So the African framework, it's called the African Principles and Guidelines on Corporate Governance. And it's a framework pretty much like the King Code on corporate governance. And so essentially what it does is to say, as a country, it was really developed for countries that had not developed any of their codes. We have 55 countries on the continent. When we did our research, we found that only 22 have developed some kind of a code on corporate governance. Okay. So we set it up to say, these are some of the elements and pillars of what a good corporate governance code looks like. But within that pillar or framework, it was when we then said, actually governance as we have done it before does not benefit the countries where we live, because we borrow policies from Western countries, and their policies were really designed for very sophisticated commercial environments. But policies for here at home are very different. So we then adopted this paradigm shift, and essentially to say, we have most of our companies are in the SME sector, the informal sector. So what does governance look like within those kinds of sectors? I'll be happy to refer you to that code.
Please, will you be staying a bit after so that people can? Yeah. All right, the next two questions, quickly, short questions there. There's a lady here in front, and then okay, you've raised your hand. I've seen you. So she'll come back to you. She will, ma'am, with the white t-shirt, she is going to come to you. Okay.
Okay, can I go for online as well?
Yes, you will.
In the meantime, thank you. We do have people online. Just want to thank you to the Good Governance Academy, who is hosting the webinar online. So we have 3 questions. I'll start with the one from Agnes. What happened to principles and guidelines on corporate governance developed under the African Review Mechanism for AU? Is it because it was borrowed from Western models?
I
That
think
is the
we've
first.
answered that.
Yeah.
question.
Okay, next question is from Betty Maloka. I'm in the mining sector, corporate affairs, and would like to grow into corporate governance. I'm looking for a mentor. Is Madam Tumi available as a mentor?
Tumi will consider that if she has time. If not, I'm sure you have people that you can refer her to.
Absolutely.
I will also share a mentor framework that people can join.
Yes.
Next one.
Okay, from Busisiwe Dlamini. How do women who work independently get to be noticed as with potential to serve on boards, as they do not have executive experience in large corporates?
Well, I think Pindi spoke about it. She says, network, be in this room as a starting point, for instance. If you work alone, and many people do, find organizations and initiatives such as these ones, and also don't always necessarily look for a paying board role.
Start giving in as whether it's a small NPO.
Oh, exactly.
Somewhere for your free time, because you will not get board experience. Yes, you will attend
Exactly.
common purpose and do executive course to elevate you. But then again, the actual sitting in board experience is done there. People sometimes often just want to go into a paying board and they would not be able to take you. So that's where I started. I started with boards that did not pay for me to be able to get that insight. Can we get that question? And then the lady in the white t-shirt, please.
Thank you so much for
Trying
the
to push time.
enriching discussion. The question is about the framework and the
Yes.
development thereof. Did you go on an insights gathering exercise, and what was that like? Was it extensive? Was it selected? And then also, what initiatives have you deployed to embed the framework in those countries?
Okay, and then we take that
Excellent.
other question and then Tumi can answer. Those are the last questions we have, right? Oh, yes, we had 2 here. Yes, now I remembered. I said 6 actually. That's
Thank
the
you
last
very
2.
much. Oh, thank you. My name is Malarato Sekha. My question is, there's some kind of protocols, even red tape in spaces that you find yourself in, like, the peer review mechanism. I want to find out that when you came in as a technical advisor, finding people and governments that have been operating with impunity, what is your, maybe how did you navigate that for starters? And was there a time where you wanted to give up, given the red tape, governments, especially in the continent, outside of South Africa?
Okay. Do me short one. just
Okay.
quickly, so that we can take the last 2.
Yes. So, yes, the framework was developed in consultation with countries. So we visited 14 countries where we were speaking with companies themselves, chambers of commerce, those countries that have stock exchanges, the stock exchanges. And so it was a very thorough research done, both physically but also desktop research. And because the important part of it, as you have said, is once we got to have that framework adopted, we needed those same countries to then be able to domesticate and adopt into their own frameworks in the countries. Where we are now is that they were adopted by heads of state. We're in the process now of assisting and supporting member states to adopt them domestically. Ghana is the first country that did so. And I was very lucky. They invited me into their domestication process, and I was there when it was launched. Uganda is next. And we invited a number of countries about 2 months ago, a roundtable where we said, in order to domesticate, this is what you will need to do. This is the process, and so on.
Thank you.
And the
question
issue
from the
around
lady.
the red tape, yes, I mean, and impunity, unfortunately, we live in a world that has so much impunity, but that has also is diverse, so what might be impunity in South Africa may not be necessarily in Angola or elsewhere. And so, I've had to learn to be very adaptable, and to actually, like I said, to always be learning. And red tape is very frustrating, particularly in the public sector, because the African Union is essentially part of the public sector. But if you have decided what your mission is in life, you know, whether it's your mission for that specific year or number of years, then you are able to say, this is why I am here.
Yes.
So all these other frustrations will come. They will not go anywhere. But when you know why you're doing what you are doing, what your purpose is for being in a place where you are, you find ways to deal and address what's happening around you. But you don't let yourself get consumed by the noise and all the barriers that you come across. When I went to the AU, I didn't know that I would end up developing the framework, but it then became my purpose. And at the time, I also encountered incredible barriers, most of which, as I have said, also started with me.
Yep.
Because I didn't believe myself to have been qualified enough to do a work of this magnitude. So I had to work with that. And once you deal with the internal barriers, the external barriers, they're easy. You know, you have to create alliances and people that you work with, because anything that is worthwhile, we will not do by ourselves. So
Right.
if I find you and I work with you in an organization, you must decide who is aligned with you and create those alliances.
Yes.
And those are people that will help you. I mean, if you look at a football team, and I always say this, there are 11 players on the field and they all want to score a goal.
Yep.
And they keep passing the ball. So whatever challenge you have, pass it on. Or it's a challenge and an idea. You may not be placed in the right position within the institution to address it, but there are other people who feel the same way. So keep passing the ball, and it doesn't matter who scores the goal.
That's
What
the
you
part.
want
Love
is the
that.
goal.
Love that. Last two questions. Keep it short this time. The chair there, yes, and then the other lady in black and white. Thank you. Yes, you.
Thank you very much. My name is Sybil. You spoke a lot about governance and developing frameworks thereof. Can you maybe share your experience with AI governance, both at company level and at country level? Because the laws that govern AI are the ones that are going to guide companies. My experience in this country is that we talk about AI governance at board level, but I haven't really heard much at country level.
Absolutely. An important question. Thank you. The next one.
Thank you. My name is Asanda Beni. Just a quick one. Drawing from your corporate governance experience, I'd like to find out what is your take on being invited to a board versus the application. I believe that we are one of the few countries in the world that actually get people to apply to be on boards. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, that's a very important and interesting question around AI governance. And it's interesting because AI governance is so new, or rather AI is very new. Not only is it new, it's evolving very quickly.
Yes.
And what that means is policy work is always behind. We're always trying to catch up. And I was saying, I went to speak at an IT Web conference, and I was also asked a very similar question. And I was like, how do you set up governance structures for a future that you don't understand?
Sure.
You know, so, and I think a lot of policymakers perhaps find that to be the case. And so that's why you'll find it very hard to identify governance or policy frameworks on AI at a national level, but within companies you do. And I think that's a function of it is fast evolving. And by the time you pass any laws 2 years down the line, the AI that you were setting to reform or to govern is not the AI that's currently in place. So my take on AI is it's going to have to go back to leadership. the people that are on the board must define the AI strategies for their companies. But the leadership that we need must be leadership that's based on values. Because to govern for AI, we must, reform for ethical use of AI.
Yeah.
And we must protect citizens from cybersecurity and all of those things. But because the policy is going to have to work behind and trying to catch up, it's going to be hard. So that's why I'm advocating for boards themselves to continue to identify those challenges and to actually address it. And you're quite right, even on the continent, the AI strategy is very unclear. It's not well defined. You come to South Africa, it's the same thing. And perhaps South Africa is a lot more advanced. And I think there was another question, we're a lot more advanced within corporate governance. Our stock exchange is the most sophisticated on the continent. And so similarly, then our board members or boards tend to deal with very sophisticated issues. So I do think that, first of all, to have policies on AI, you need to know people who know AI.
Yep.
And you don't have many people sitting in Pretoria who understand this landscape. That's unfortunately the truth.
Answer the last one. That's a very interesting one. The last question,
Sorry, what was
please.
the last question again?
About appointing versus application to boards.
Yeah. So, I think I touched on briefly around, how do we get to know what board roles are in place? It's very, very hard unless you know people. And I don't think that that's the right way to go about it. I do think that there has to be transparency. I don't think it's a bad thing actually to apply for a board. Because when you apply, it means there's information out there that there's a particular board role that's available, and anyone can actually put their name down. So I think that's a good practice because, it's also transparent. What I do think is not necessarily a good practice is how we've been doing things to say, okay, it's by word of mouth. I used to be at Bowman's, the lead partner at Bowman's, I know him personally, and every year I'd be like, hey, let me know if any boards come up, But what about people who have not been in those kinds of, it's completely unfair. And I don't think that we should accept that just because things have happened in this manner, they need to carry on in that way. And secondly, the professionalization of boards, we must work towards that. The IOD has courses. Not only do those courses help us to advance our knowledge around how to be board members, but again, that's when you are able to say as a company, I draw on these skills because I know this person's qualified, not because this person knows this person or that person. So I think we need to move towards professionalization of board roles, and there needs to be a lot of transparency, which is not quite in place at the moment. And I do thirdly think that initiatives such as the Women on Board, like I said, are really critical, and you must advocate for this to happen.
A round of applause to Tumi. We did not want the session to end, my word. Tumi, I am actually honored and grateful. Albeit I didn't answer all my questions, I will grab you somewhere on the LinkedIns and of the world. We have learned that you've got to start with yourself, identify where you're lacking, go out and seek information, seek mentorship. You've got to be able to know what you don't know for you to start getting better or work towards getting better. We know that we've learned from you that to strengthen governance, you've got to be intentional about it. You've got to be able to say, I identify this is the lack and I'm going to speak out and do that. Lastly, inclusive growth. Wherever we lead, we need to remember the impact and be mindful of saying, what impact do I want to create for myself, for those to me, and the community, the continent, and the globe? Thank you so much, ladies, this morning. It has been an amazing fireside check. I didn't want to leave.